as a Christian, the Bible is foundational to a lot of my beliefs. There's many things that we can learn about God through the natural world around us, through science, through reason, but there's some things that we can only learn through direct revelation, God's direct message to us. And for the Christian, that direct message, that Word of God, is the Bible. And so maybe for that reason, because it's so foundational to the beliefs of a Christian, many non-believers will point to the Bible and say that this is one of the many reasons that they're not a Christian. They don't trust the Bible. They'll point out things like the fact that there's no original manuscript to any book of the Bible. We have copies of the books of the Bible, but we don't have the original books written by the people who wrote them. And they'll say things like, well, the Bible has been translated so many times into so many different languages. I mean, it just seems to stand to reason in their minds that, well, the Bible must have changed over time. The Bible, as we read it today, it probably just doesn't look like the way that the Bible originally looked. And so the message of the Bible today might be totally different. Maybe Christians today don't even believe the same things, worship the same God as those early Christians with the original manuscripts. So how are we going to address this as Christians? I think the first thing I want to do is address this issue of translation. I always hear this talked about, the Bible's been translated into so many languages, and so therefore we can't trust the Bible. We can't read the Bible in English now because it went through so many steps to get here. It kind of sounds like a game I played when I was growing up in at birthday parties or different youth events. The telephone game. I don't know if they still play it now, but what you would do is you'd get your 15 or 20 kids lined up, and the person running the game would give a sentence, usually a little bit longer, more complicated sentence, and they'd whisper it into the ear of the first kid. And the goal of the game was just to say word for word what was told to you. So the first kid is told a sentence, and then he whispers that same sentence, ideally word for word, to the next kid. But the sentences are so complicated, and you're only hearing it once, that for the most part, most kids are going to change some aspect of the sentence. Some word is going to be dropped or changed. And so as they each do it, now 15, 20 kids down the line, the last kid is going to say out loud what they heard. And usually it's nothing like what the first kid heard. It's totally different. And I think in some ways people would suggest that the Bible is like the telephone game, that the Bible was written in its original language, and then it was translated to another language. Maybe it's translated to Latin, and then that's translated to another language. It's translated to Spanish or French, and that's translated to German, and then that's translated to English. And who knows how many other languages in between. And so it's kind of like a game of telephone, that each time the Word of God, the Bible, is translated into a new language, some of the meaning or nuance is lost, and by the time you get to English, you've lost so much that it's no longer anything like the way the Bible was written way back when. Well, let me put your mind at ease about some of these things. We do not translate. When you get your English Bible from your English bookstore, that Bible was not translated from anything other than the original language that the Bible was written in. The Bible was written originally in 3 languages. Different books are written in different languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. We have copies of the Bible in all the original languages. So no, those copies were not created through a translation process. They're still the original language. We translate from them into English so an English speaker can read and understand. If you wanted to learn those languages that the Bible was written in, you could today, and then go and read the Bible in its original language for yourself. There is no telephone game of the Bible. I don't know where this idea first came from. I think to me, honestly, it sounds like something that maybe somebody heard a long time ago and just repeated it, and now it has become a great myth of the Bible. There is no 12-step translation process. We go from the original language to English. Now, it is true that we don't have any copies of the Bible, of any biblical book, the original manuscripts. We don't have the original manuscripts to any original book. We have copies, and sometimes these copies come years, sometimes many years, after the time we believe the book was originally written. So there's your next question: is the copy that we have that's closest to the creation of the Bible, of the biblical book, is that copy trustworthy? Well, I think we can sort of test the copying process. You know, in the old days, before the printing press, and definitely before all our current digital technology, to copy a book of the Bible meant to copy it by hand. So you would have to take a page of the manuscript you're copying and then try to reproduce it by hand identically. It seems like it would be a lot of work, and it seems like it would be very easy to mess up. And you would be right in saying that. However, the copying process was so strict that the people making the copies were always trying to go out of their way to figure out a way to minimize any mistake they would make. So they would do things like they would count the letters, how many letters are on their first page, and then the page that they had created as a copy, they count those letters, make sure that they match up. They count the number of words on the original that they're copying from, and the number of words of the new page they created. They would go through all types of different tests to make sure that each page they'd created was an identical copy to the one that it came from. So I think we can have some level of confidence that the copiers were trying to do their best to accurately copy. They were not rushing through all their copying. They weren't haphazardly or without any type of rule or structure. But what's great is the number of copies we have. We have thousands of copies of the Bible. Some of these copies would be maybe incomplete. Maybe we only have like a couple pages of a manuscript that existed, and other times we might have an entire book. But we have so many thousands of copies that we're able to constantly compare. And these thousands of copies were made over many, many years. So we're able to see, was the earliest copy similar to the last copy, or was it very different? A while ago, they made huge headlines, and you still hear about it, talked about today. It was the Dead Sea Scrolls. People found hidden in some caves these scrolls. It was near the Dead Sea, so we call it the Dead Sea Scrolls. They found copies of biblical manuscripts and many other manuscripts which were not biblical in nature. But what was great about this was that some of these copies of the biblical manuscripts were the oldest copies we had ever seen, sometimes hundreds of years before what we had currently been using. And so it was a great opportunity for us to test the Bible. What we were able to do is we were able to take the copies that we were used to using before the Dead Sea Scroll discovery and compare them to the Dead Sea Scrolls and see how close or different are these. Over the 100 years or couple 100-year gap, how many changes were made? One of the biggest books or most complete books that we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls is the book of Isaiah. And so that's the one that typically most people will talk about in terms of comparison. The book of Isaiah in the Dead Sea Scrolls is essentially the same as the next copy we have, or the version of Isaiah that we were already reading today. The Dead Sea Scroll discovery made no changes to our understanding of Isaiah. Now, there were differences. We don't need to sugarcoat it and say there was no differences, but I think we should keep in mind the nature of the differences. The majority of the differences in our copies, and especially when we're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, came down to things like spelling. It would be like a word in our current copies would be spelled differently in the Dead Sea Scrolls, similar to like when we spell the word color here in America, we don't use a U, but in other parts of the world, they put a U in the word color. It's the same word, it has the same meaning, but there's two different ways to spell it. Or contractions, like saying don't instead of do not. Ultimately, whether you say don't or do not is more a matter of preference, right? It makes no meaningful difference to the message, even though there might be a change. So the bottom line is, though, that the message of Isaiah, of all of the Bible, has been unchanged. There is no evidence that we could point to suggest that the message of the Bible has changed. The Bible, the God of the Bible that we believe in today, is the God that the ancient Christians and before them the ancient Jews believed in. The nature of reality, the fact that humans are sinful, the fact that we need salvation from God to be reunified with Him. The things we believe today were also believed by those ancient believers. There's been no change in the teachings of Christianity over the thousands of years that it has existed. If we don't want to believe the Bible, that's up to us. but we can't really reasonably make a case that the Bible itself is untrustworthy because it has changed over time. Quite simply put, it just hasn't. And that should give us great confidence as Christians that there was no secret message of God that was lost to time. And we're not believing made-up fairy tales that just evolved as Christianity changed over the ages. No, we believe, when we read the Bible and we believe its teachings, we believe the Christianity as taught by the people who wrote it, by the God who inspired them. Our beliefs in God are the same today as they have always been through the history of Christianity, and that should give us great confidence in our beliefs.